For all the debate over free speech and gun control, one area where the government enjoys broad authority gets far less attention. That's the ability to seize private property in the name of the public good. That right of eminent domain has shaped much of the Boston we know today, and now it's causing concern in Somerville. WGBH News reporter Adam Riley has more.
If Somerville has a spiritual center, it's Union Square, a bustling neighborhood where traffic is dense, swanky new businesses share space with gritty throwbacks, and the crowd runs the ethnic gamut. But in 10 years, Union Square won't look like this.
I hope you're seeing a neighborhood that is even more thriving and eclectic and edgy than it is now, but with even more housing there, more people living in the center of the square. That is certainly a safer place to bike and walk.
With the long-awaited Green Line extension coming to Somerville, Mayor Joe Curtatone sees an opportunity to go further. He wants to rebuild Union Square to give it what it's long lacked, including more housing and more green space. And Curtatone insists he can do all that while leaving Union Square's character intact.
The creativity, originality, sort of the history, the funky and freakiness of Union Square that we really love, our soul. We don't want to lose that.
To make it happen, Curtatone is prepared to use eminent domain, seizing private property and paying fair market value. Now some of Union Square's best-known businesses fear for their future and the neighborhoods.
Be careful what you wish for, is if you want something too squeaky clean and too polished and maybe not as authentic and maybe something cookie cutter, I'm not sure if that'll work here.
For 25 years, Ricky DiGiovanni's Flower Market has been a small island of greenery in Union Square. But it's one of several parcels slated for possible seizure for redevelopment, a prospect DiGiovanni dreads.
25 years of spilled blood on this place here. My heart, everything I put into is in this site right now, and with my customers. So to upright and move, I don't know. I don't think that's a possibility.
He's not the only one feeling anxious. Jose Garcia and a partner opened AB Sushi 3 years ago. And after a slow start, business is brisk.
Union Square has become like a food destination for many people. I like the neighborhood here. All the customers we have, they are like a regular.
But if AB's landlord balks at redevelopment, the city could seize the property, and AB might have to move.
We put like over $200,000 to this business. It took like 2 years to build this restaurant, and now we're doing successful. And I mean, 2 or 3 years later, we have to leave. Like,
not good.
Not good at all.
Curtatone is a fan of Ricky's and AB Sushi and says he'd rather not use eminent domain to hasten redevelopment. But if he has to, he will.
Eminent domain is a useful tool if you do it right. And in many cases, it should only be used as a last resort. But in many cases, will also help us repaint the canvas that was drafted a long time ago.
Even though some people like that canvas just the way it is. Somerville has already used eminent domain to take some parcels along the path of the planned Green Line extension, so that project can move forward. That's not why the city would take the properties that we're talking about here today. They are or would be part of this bigger redevelopment push, an attempt to make the city greener, provide more housing, and also improve the traffic. The traffic is pretty nasty down there, and has been for years.
Well, the classic case of eminent domain in Boston was the West End around Government Center, which a lot of people now think it was a mistake. Did you ask Curtatone about that?
I did, and Curtatone is in agreement that it was, he calls it a tragedy, a disaster, a failure of urban planning. As he tells it, there are two big differences between what happened in the West End and what is going on right now in Somerville. For one, he says that the vision that he's implementing for Union Square has been hashed out over the course of years with extensive input from the community. So he says that's one big difference. The other big difference is Mayor Curtatone has made it clear that he would like businesses that are currently benefiting Union Square to stick around after the neighborhood is reinvented. Of course, the question is who gets to decide which businesses are good and which ones aren't.
Yeah, it's a really tough one and sad, too. Well, here to discuss when it's appropriate for the government to seize private land and what constitutes the public good is Peter Mead, who is the former head of the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Well, you ran the BRA under Mayor Menino. Was there an example of eminent domain that you can think of that was fairly dramatic like this would have been?
No. Nothing like this came before us while I was at the BRA. The Ferdinand Building in Dudley Square is being built for school department headquarters. There were a couple of pieces of property that were taken around the Ferdinand Building. The businesses were relocated and I think worked out well. But it was, if it was your business, it wasn't a small matter. But it's... we did not have a large taking like that. And I think the mayor was correct in what he said. You have to be very careful. This is an enormous amount of power. And the Supreme Court, a few years ago in a New London decision, gave an awful lot of authority. And I think you have to be really judicious as you use it.
All right, let me bring another voice into this discussion. David Turk is the executive director of the Beacon Hill Institute. So, David, you're basically okay with eminent domain, but how do you feel about this Somerville project? Have you looked at it carefully?
Well, I'm basically okay with eminent domain if it's all about government seizing property for a legitimate public use. What happened in New London, Connecticut, as we just observed, was really a tragedy. Those people were forced out of their homes, and nothing ever came of the project. Millions of dollars were wasted on that project because of a vision that local planners had that was unrealistic from the beginning. My sense of this is that Mayor Somerville wants these existing businesses to stay there, then he should just let them alone. The problem with all these exercises and using eminent domain to engage in commercial redevelopment is that politicians are using other people's money for purposes for which they are ultimately not responsible. If the project goes bad, they still stay in office. They still have a job. What you want to do is you want to have private investors putting their own money up to start businesses wherever they might happen to be, instead of holding the taxpayers responsible for taking business away from people who are doing a good job, who are serving the community, in some sort of speculation that this is going to raise tax revenues or somehow make the place more agreeable according to some mayor's concept of what more agreeable might be.
But is it a tool that you can also use as kind of like maybe a threat? I mean, he's trying to create some green space too, but even in the Filene's basement project, the mayor threatened at that point because the developers had stalled. There was that big hole in the ground. I'm going to take the thing and do something else with it.
Yeah, actually, we wouldn't have. I negotiated with those owners. And I was yesterday at the Filene site oogling the place.
Good.
And very proud of what happened there. But, you know, if a mayor wants to threaten a developer, and depending on if it's a publicly traded, if you downzone, if you take the zoning and say, you know, let's say the zoning is this high, and you downzone it to this high, they have lost a substantial amount of money. You have done the same kind of thing, same kind of harm, frankly, that you would do by taking the property. In the case of Filene's, and a number of people wrote that we should do it and it would be good for the mayor to step. We never had the money. It was impossible to do.
Well, thank goodness. Thank goodness you didn't have the money. Private developers have done the job. There was never any need for eminent domain. But yes, and it was. I work in that neighborhood.
The community.
I work in that neighborhood. It was disheartening to walk past Filene's where I used to go shopping. Yes, that's true. But in time, it all got done without this kind of government confiscation that eminent domain often amounts to.
You have to admit that in certain communities, like, I think I was driving through Saugus. I don't know, offense to Saugus, but it's a wreck. There's no zoning in some of these places. And I think the mayor, I mean, he's trying to keep the character, the culture, the quirkiness, and at the same time expand businesses and the Green Line and everything else into
the Green Line's coming in, but I don't know of a master plan that endorses quirkiness. Every master plan is reflecting the preferences, the choices of the planners, not necessarily the people who are actually doing the shopping, living in that area. So this will all be imposed according to somebody else's vision, again using taxpayer money and at the expense of businesses that want to stay right where they are and are doing a good job of serving the community. So I look very skeptically on what this mayor is promoting.
I think if you're in a sleepy town without a lot of community input, it's easy to pull off a quiet taking property. In this case, you're in a very activist community in Somerville. And a mayor, frankly, who has had it's not like he was elected and stopped communicating with people. No. And I think he's got the pulse of the folks. Very difficult thing to try to figure out how to do this. How do you keep the character of that square? How do you move it forward? How do you add green space and not take property? And essentially what you have is what a lot of people object to, and that is the government selecting winners and losers.
Exactly. And how do they decide a fair market?
Well, of course, they're frequently when people's property is taken, it's at the low end of the market, and frequently people simply don't want to move, no matter what they're paid, and unless it's a legitimate public use, I would say, as the Constitution uses that word use, it should not be subject to
not just a rearrangement, but public use.
And you know, Kelo paved the way for governments getting into the business of making business opportunities for commercial development in some speculative hope that they're going to bring in more tax revenue, which in the case of Kelo infamously resulted in just the opposite.
Kelo's that New London case that we spoke of. Justice O'Connor wrote the dissenting opinion, and she said this is Robin Hood in reverse, that what this is you're taking from poor people and giving to rich people.
That was awful.
And that shouldn't have been the power of eminent domain. I agree with her.
All right. Peter Mead, great to have you back from
nice to be
your
here.
Florida sojourn. David Turk, always good to see you.
Good to see you, too.